Hello and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Today we're focusing on Manchester City's 115 charges for alleged breaches of financial rules after the long-awaited hearing started earlier this week. So how might all this play out for City? With me today, we've got the Athletics newsletter writer, Phil Hay, and also our senior football news reporter, Matt Slater, with us as well. Matt, let's start with you on this, right? It's been over 18 months since the Premier League announced its investigation has escalated into charges in February 2023, charges which City strongly deny. We will go into this a little further on especially the individual charges, but can you tell us how we got to this point as succinctly as you possibly can, please?
Blimey. Well, yeah, as you say, 18 months since the charges, nearly 6 years since this story first emerged. And that was with those hacked emails, those leaked emails that appeared in Der Spiegel. I think it was November 2018. God, how do I do this quickly? Look, they were emails between very senior members of staff at Manchester City that appear to paint a picture of a plan, a conspiracy, you might say, to disguise owner funding, so to disguise additional and significant sums of money that Sheikh Mansour was pumping into Manchester City in those crucial early years, post takeover, and to disguise that as legitimate commercial sponsorships. So Etisalat, Etihad, etc., etc. A lot of them Abu Dhabi, UAE related companies, and some other bits to do with image rights and to do with contract for their former manager Roberto Mancini. But that's what the emails look like they're explaining. Now, then, of course, off the back of that, UEFA investigated. Premier League opened an investigation as well, but let UEFA go first, if you like. UEFA, having had previous with Manchester City, they'd already prosecuted them before for inflating the value of their sponsorship deals. Pretty promptly, certainly relatively speaking, banned them for 2 years. Manchester City appealed that at the Court of Arbitration for Sport and won. Okay, they got that appeal wiped out. They were fined for non-cooperation, and that was July 2020. Now, Manchester City have always denied wrongdoing. They have always suggested that what those emails look like didn't happen, or we just got it wrong. We don't know the context, and that was the sort of basis of their case at CAS. Lots of experts were called, lots of people from the companies that did the sponsoring saying, no. Look, of course we sponsored Manchester City, of course we paid for it, and of course we've got value for money. So, there is nothing to see here. And 3 people on that panel, it was a 2-for-1 majority in Manchester City's favour, that UEFA's case was not proven. And Manchester City have always said, we've got irrefutable evidence. So then we have 3 or 4 years of kind of not much happening. Is the Premier League still doing this? Mm-hmm. And I think we got a clue. So probably not quite 3 or 4 years, but we weren't quite sure. We did sort of lose track of it. We got a clue in the summer of 2021 when Manchester City and Premier League had been to court, actual court, not arbitration, court, arguing about jurisdiction, arguing about what the Premier League was asking them to provide, a lot more documentation. Basically, Premier League doing its investigation, and the Manchester City saying, no fishing trip. What are you doing? You're not allowed to ask for that. They took it to court. The Premier League won. Okay, we're going to carry on with our investigation. You do need to cooperate. And crucially, because they did it in a court, the judge said, and this needs to be published. This ruling needs to be published because that's what happens in court, my court. So we got a little clue that it was going on. Fast forward, best part of 2 years, the Premier League finally charges them. And I think I should probably stop now because that, I think, refreshes us in terms of the 115 charges, asterisk, is it really 115, and where we are now.
Matt, from City's perspective, who have they brought on board to defend the club?
Oh, well, absolutely. Look, I mean, the simplest way of perhaps explaining this or putting this is one of the hacked emails is memorably between, I think, the senior lawyer at Manchester City kind of sending a message
Mm.
to another person saying something that he had heard the chairman of Manchester City, Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, say to Gianni Infantino, now president of FIFA, but was number two at UEFA at the
Mm.
time, that he would rather spend 30 million on the world's 50 best lawyers and sue UEFA for 10 years than accept some kind of settled agreement, accept some kind of punishment. Now, right from the off, that was Man City, tanks on lawn, setting their stall out. We are going to aggressively defend ourselves here. We're going to lawyer up and we'll see you in court. And that has been their approach from the beginning of this. They have hired the very best. So, I was just listening actually before I came on to quite an interesting podcast that the lawyer, the trade mag, the trade press for
Mm.
that industry, they're now taking football very, that was the sort of general point of the podcast. The legal industry in the UK is taking football incredibly seriously because the sums of money involved, the amount of regulation, it's gone from being this little niche area that a few firms did to the very biggest firms in the world all have
Wow.
big sports departments, and they are all, well, a lot of them are represented in this hearing. Both the Premier League and Man City have lawyered up, and they are throwing large sums of money at this.
Wow, that's a lot. It'd be really fascinating to see how this sort of uh follows on, really, Phil, because I'm just thinking about this, right? And this is a story that's really caught the appetite of many football fans globally. Um, let's say a decision is made and there is a verdict for this. Um, what's to stop Manchester City, if they are found guilty, from appealing, which might take us a little further on down the line again? I mean, I don't think this is the end of it, right?
Well, nothing at all, and that surely applies to the Premier League as well. I don't think either side will be willing to admit defeat at what would be the first hurdle. And Matt referenced the previous case between UEFA and Manchester City. That in itself shows the value of an appeal if you think you have grounds to overturn the verdict against you.
Mm.
Um, I was just thinking the other day, actually, if you were a legal student graduating at the moment, whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, you'd never have particularly thought of moving into sport as your kind of specialism. These days, it seems like the obvious route to go because there's an endless amount of work and a huge amount of money to be had. And I mean, even just listening to Matt's first answer there, it kind of explains away from the detail why it is that this has taken so long and why it's become so complex, because there is a huge amount involved. And anybody who's ever followed a legal case, which is essentially what this is, will know that it can be torturously slow. And it kind of has to be, because if you're talking about criminal cases, you have reputations at stake and, liberty at stake as well. If there's a civil case, reputations and money. In this instance, it's the Premier League rules, credibility of them are kind of there to be examined. But also for Manchester City, it is the question of whether or not their success, which has been, massive, and they are the most successful English club of the last decade, whether that was fair and above board or whether it was down to, financial cheating, which obviously they deny, they insist that it wasn't. And again, Matt's saying there that City were much more prepared to fight this than they were to accept a settlement, tells you that they want to win, and I think to a degree expect to win. But at the same time, the Premier League levying so many charges against them, and there is this kind of dispute between whether it's 115 charges or 129 in total. It doesn't really matter. It's a mammoth stack of them. If the Premier League do have those upheld, then there'll be serious repercussions for City. But you're right. I don't think in any way this will be the end of it, this initial case. And I was reading Jacob Whitehead's roundup of,
Mm.
which was excellent yesterday, actually, on the site of where we're at, given that it's really opaque and secretive and we don't know a huge amount, certainly very little about what's going on behind closed doors at the moment. There's a paragraph in his piece which said, those with knowledge of proceedings, and he'd spoken to people anonymously on both sides, and they have to speak anonymously because there are very few people who can actually, speak publicly about this.
Mm.
But those with knowledge of proceedings believe the Commission will have moved quickly if they reach a decision before the end of the season in May. So, if what I would suggest is if you're planning to expend a lot of energy on crossing fingers, I'd maybe wait until the last day of Christmas.
Yeah.
In that piece by Jacob, actually, Matt,
Mm.
Jacob basically puts the charges into 5 categories. I'll read them for you so you don't have
no.
to. So
Okay.
let's just break this down, right? So he says 54 charges of failure to provide accurate financial information, 14 charges for failure to provide accurate details for player and manager payments, 7 or 21 charges of breaching profit and sustainability rules, 5 charges for failing to comply with UEFA's FFP regulations, and 35 charges of failing to cooperate with the Premier League's investigations. Now, out of all those categories, which ones should City really be worried about here?
Okay, well, look, that's exactly the right way to go about this. And in fact, I think some of the problems that the Premier League has created for itself is that number. That number has hung over the Premier League. It's such a sort of, oh my word, But really, it is five groups of charges, and they're just sort of multiples, was it's over a number of seasons, and lots of sort of sub laws are breached. So there's 5 groups, and of them, I would say, in order, serious, top to bottom, it's that first group, that sort of 54. That is around the disguising owner funding via bogus, inflated sponsorships. That is, I think, the nub of this. That the big commercial deals that you landed in those early years, you kind of made up. And what was going on there was Sheikh Mansour, or sources, people around Sheikh Mansour, were actually topping up the companies. So if it was, let's say, 50 million from Etihad, 8 million was coming really from Etihad, and Sheikh Mansour was providing the rest. So that's a very serious charge. And that was argued at CAS. And that is another reason why this is so incredibly serious, because there is an element, although we are talking civil here, not criminal, that serious people, significant people, perjured themselves in that CAS process. So that's just something to have in the back of your mind. Again, the stakes are very, very high. So that's the most serious. Those next 2 are really, I think, flow from those first 2. So if you believe those first 2 things to be happened, then you have almost certainly breached Premier League PSR rules. You haven't been level straight with us. You've misdeclared things. You may well have had some breaches early on. So that's where that big group of Premier League charges is. And then the UEFA charges is the same thing. Like you did not file accurate information to us, and you may well have breached as well. So that's where those 2 groups are. And then the last group is the non-cooperation stuff. That's the thing I was saying about how hard Manchester City have fought the Premier League on the investigation. If Manchester City, and I will keep saying this, they strongly deny everything, are guilty of the lot, boom, right? Who knows where we go with this, right? Genuinely unprecedented, very, very significant punishments should be expected. If they're only guilty of non-cooperation, i.e. they win and they can prove the rest is all nonsense, and we did have irrefutable evidence all along, and all we've done is obstruct because we didn't like this process. We thought it was a kangaroo court, and we were fighting, for our reputations. It'll be a fine. Maybe, at worst, a small points penalty. It's, to be honest with you, it's almost like a mitigating or aggravating factor. If you think about the Everton and Leicester and Nottingham Forest cases, Nottingham Forest cooperated, Leicester didn't. Everton didn't, and then they did. It's sort of a kind of you add some points or you take some points away. It's aggravating, mitigating. I think the level of non-cooperation with Man City will demand a significant punishment, but they probably won't. They certainly won't mind. It is almost like the price of doing business. It's almost like the price of their reputation, of fighting for what they believe in. So look, that's how it all stacks up.
It would seem to me that the non-cooperation only becomes relevant if they win the larger share of the case. If they lose the whole thing, then the non-cooperation isn't going to be the thing that really hits them in terms of punishment. 2 things I quickly wanted to ask you, Matt. The first is, am I right in saying that the Premier League have been able to procure more information about this than UEFA have, and on that basis, their position in this hearing and in this case should be technically stronger?
Yes, is the short answer. How much they've managed to procure, how much extra, and how much stronger that makes their case, we just don't know. It is pure speculation. But, they have been able to get more. And there are sort of 2, I think, crucial bits on this. UEFA did rush its case. and there's been a lot of, kind of Monday morning quarterbacking about this afterwards. Why did it rush its case? I think it was very concerned about, the next Champions League and this sort of hanging over the tournament. I think maybe a little bit of complacency. I think they thought they had Man City, and they didn't. They didn't have them like properly. They genuinely lost at CAS. So mistakes were made, and the key mistake was they had the Der Spiegel hacked emails, but they failed to ask for what was known in court as the run of the emails, i.e. the emails before and after, the context. And they could have, if they really dug their heels in, they could have insisted on that. But they chose not to, because Man City sort of pushed back, and UEFA were almost sort of looking at the clock and thinking, well, is it worth it? The emails kind of speak for themselves, don't they? We've got this. No. And, Man City then were able to go to court and say, well, look, the other lot didn't really want it that much, so maybe they're not relevant. And of course, we're like, well, yeah, UEFA, you didn't ask for that stuff, so you clearly didn't think it was that relevant. What we then got a year or so later was Der Spiegel did release a load more stuff. So we have now if you want to, it's all out there, seen more emails that do provide a bit more context. And, the various camps in this have made their minds up about what they say or what they don't say. But anyway, it's all out there. So that's the first thing that the Premier League has. The second thing is they clearly, and we got a very good clue about this in that court case I mentioned from the summer of 2021. And that was all around what is known as sort of discovery and, kind of evidence gathering. The Premier League clearly asked Manchester City for a lot of documentation around those commercial deals, money in and out. Can I see invoices? We are speculating, but they clearly asked for the lot. So that, I think, those two bits, the Premier League have got the run of emails, they've got more emails, and they've got more supporting information. We just don't know. So,
okay, can I pick up on the who knows bit, because you're not shy in doorstepping governing body events. I've seen you do it before, and this is taking place at what is it, the International Dispute Resolution Centre, which sounds like everybody's favourite tourist attraction in London.
It's near St Paul's. It's nice.
Yeah, somebody said about 2 minutes away. I would imagine there'd be very little point in you hovering outside for the 2.5 months that this is going to take. And what I wanted to ask was, have you ever seen a process that was as secretive as this and as watertight? I know we've had all the leaked emails that Der Spiegel picked up, but since the process has actually got going in a legal sense and it's become the Premier League versus Manchester City, it's been so tight, which is actually pretty unusual in the game these days.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll be honest. When the Premier League gets into these sort of situations with its clubs, which is relatively rare, I know we've had a spate of them, but prior to that we hadn't had many for ages. I mean, the EFL more regularly. When it gets serious like this, people do clam up. It is important that they do. The whole point of arbitration is it's private and it is between these parties, and they kind of agree to go at it in a closed room. And then at the end, we didn't used to get it was fair play to the EFL. They were the ones that really started publishing really good long rulings. And before that, we used to sort of get press releases. Well, this is what's been decided. If there was an FA disciplinary hearing or whatever, we wouldn't get that much info as to what had actually happened. So we're getting more than we used to. But during it, no. Now what's different about this case is just the magnitude. And we've talked about the number of charges, and hopefully I've tried to get across to you all just how serious this is. This is what the Premier League is saying is, a conspiracy to defraud us over a number of times, and you fibbed about it. So that's a big allegation. And I always sort of think about what Lance
and it's going
Armstrong,
to be a big written verdict, isn't it? Huge
written verdict. And you sort of think about, I'm trying to think how long the CAS one was. It was 165 pages I've got in my head. It might have been longer. I sort of think about the massive report that was done into the big cycling doping case into Lance Armstrong and his team. I think that runs to about 500 pages. I mean, hopefully it's not going to be that long, but I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this ruling, and this is why it's going to take so long to write. not just because it's a lot of writing. I don't mean that sort of like a sort of journalist that sort of struggles to write stuff. They know it's going to be pored over. They know it's going to be appealed. So they're going to absolutely get it right. So it is you're right that does feel like this is secretive and weird. The whole thing is weird.
Yeah.
And football always does this secretly. It's quite interesting, actually. One of the more famous football barristers at the moment, Nick DeMarco, Casey, who keeps winning things. He's actually not on this case. He actually has written a really sort of interesting piece. He originally did it on LinkedIn, and I think on his own blog, where he's saying, do you know what? I think it is time to let the sun shine in a little bit. Why are we doing this privately? I think we should actually do more public hearings for basically transparency reasons, to provide fans some more certainty about what's going on, so there's credibility in the rule book. I think it's really interesting. I don't detect any massive appetite, I'm afraid to say, on the part of the clubs.
Yeah.
Or the clubs really.
Matt, very quickly, there's another case we haven't spoken about, because we've spoken about the Premier League versus Manchester City, but there's another one, Manchester City versus the Premier League. Just very, very quickly, just bring people to light on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the associated party transaction row. Oh, how would I get us into this quickly? So, do you remember when? Of course, everyone remembers when Newcastle were bought by the Saudis, the Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund PIF. Well, that I think caused an absolute panic amongst the rest of the league. It was like, oh my word, not another one, right? We perhaps sort of didn't see what Man City would become. We know now we need to nip this in the bud. So they basically beefed up the existing regulations around what is associated party transactions. So those are sponsorship deals, any kind of deal, any kind of commercial arrangement you have with a company or someone that is connected to your ownership group, an associated party. And I think it would be fair to say that they perhaps acted a bit hastily, and maybe the drafting of the rules could have been stress tested a bit, which reminds me of what we were saying about Leicester a few weeks ago. And I know various people in the game and lawyers who don't necessarily work for Newcastle United or Manchester City, who do think that maybe the regime that was set up, which is the quick way of explaining it would be almost everything you do needs to be run past an independent body that will set a fair market value for it. I know that's too much. No, they're clearly inflating that because you're his mate, or you also own that company. So everything kind of gets slowed down, and there are obviously then disputes. It's sort of like, well, who are you to say how much that thing is worth to another company in Saudi Arabia or another company in UAE? Maybe they do want to pay a premium because they want to be associated with that thing that is causing, bringing pride to the, there's sort of a halo effect. So you get into lots of very subjective conversations around value. So that's, I think, the sort of nub of it.
Okay, well, let's move on to what this could mean for City. I know we touched on it a little earlier, but Phil, Pep Guardiola agreed with La Liga president Javier Tebas in a press conference, asserting that many of City's top flight rivals hope to see them punished. I think he quite cheekily said, everyone wants to see us punished. But do you agree with that in the way Guardiola dealt with that?
I don't know whether hope to see them punished would be the right way to put it. I think if clubs and boards of other clubs are looking at the charges and asking, as other people are, whether or not City are guilty of some or all of those, and just to say again that City deny any wrongdoing, then they will expect to see City punished. I think that's probably what it is. I think they will be saying, if this goes against City, then we have to see action. I mean, there is always a bit of schadenfreude, isn't there? And there's always that thing of, and I think this applies to supporters more than club employees themselves, but of, wanting to see a club rival to yours to suffer in some way. But yeah, I think the problem for Guardiola is there is literally nothing he can do about this at the moment. And also he is, and I think we touched on this when we were talking about Everton, quite often when you have big cases like this going on in the background, because people can't speak about it, and Matt spoke about touched on the Secrecy Act, sort of the fact that this has to be confidential. The only person who's there to face questions and to answer questions is quite often the manager or a head coach. And there's a tiny amount that Guardiola can actually say about 115, 129, whatever we want to call it. He can throw grenades at people, and he can talk about what other clubs think, and about perceived jealousy on the part of rival managers or whatever else. But he can't, there's nothing that he can say about the case itself, apart from City's stance, which is that they deny doing anything wrong. So for him and the players, very little choice but to just plough on regardless. And given that the verdict on this might not come until the end of the season anyway, they might as well just attack the title in the way that they always do.
And Matt, I was just, a thought really is, when we talk about what could potentially happen to City, it's very difficult to be quite specific about what that is, simply because, in my lifetime anyway, I don't think I've ever seen a single English club be charged like this in the Premier League, right? So how do we even know what the ramifications might be? This is a moment in history in many respects.
Oh, absolutely. Look, so the simple answer is we don't know. And we don't know, right, because it's actually written in the rule book. The panel have complete discretion. So if you go back 2 answers ago when I was talking about the seriousness of the charges, let's assume, big assumption, the Premier League gets the big win and pretty much everything is proven. Well, the panel can pretty much do what it likes. And there will be, the Premier League will be, asked for its view. The prosecution will probably express a view. And I think we are talking expulsion from the league. And then there'll be obviously a conversation about where Man City fit in the pyramid. There'll certainly be a clamour, I think, from certain clubs and fan bases for maybe stripped titles. I know the Premier League, well, I strongly suspect the Premier League will not want to go down that road, because you are opening yourself up to all kinds of issues, people trying to sort of work out loss of earnings, and it just becomes very difficult. We've seen this in Olympic sport. I've already mentioned the Lance Armstrong example. His stripped titles were not reallocated. It's just really, really hard to do.
It's the asterisk effect,
isn't
it?
Well, you can almost argue, do you even need to? I mean, because you'll be just smearing, a decade of achievement. So
yeah, without a doubt, I guess to go back to brand, if you follow any of the Tour de France, and I tend to watch it every year, they barely reference the years when Lance Armstrong was involved. It's like that's been kind of expunged, and it comes back to things like the Aguero moment, doesn't it? Which is something that the Premier League hangs its hat on for advertising and is constantly there in the background whenever you're talking about title wins or whatever else. And if this does go, the way the Premier League want it to go, or it goes against Manchester City, that stuff becomes almost untouchable. It becomes toxic in a really, really strange way. And it would be incredibly damaging for the Premier League. But at the same time, depending on the ruling, they have to do what it tells them.
Yeah, it's just very difficult. So I think some other examples, when Rangers were punished, although of course they also went bankrupt. No one stripped their titles. Saracens in rugby union.
Yeah, Saracens in rugby union.
Big, salary cap ruling. They'd won, I think, 3 of the last 5 years, and they'd also won a couple of European trophies. They weren't stripped. They were relegated. It's just very hard. Olympic sport, they do reallocate the medals, but of course it's years later. You don't get the bonuses, you don't get the big uplift from your sponsor. All these people sort of feel like their moment was robbed from them. I don't know. So look, again, we go back to that scale of seriousness, and it's at the lesser end. And as I say, it's fine, at worst, sort of a small points penalty. So look, that's it. The panel has incredible discretion, and it really will depend on how many of these charges can stick and what comes out in the arbitration hearing.
Well, we've spoken about the off-pitch ramifications for City, but let's hear from our Manchester City writer Sam Lee about how this saga is affecting the footballing side of the club.
in terms of how the club and Guardiola have reacted to the hearing starting, it's obviously two very different things. For the club, this is match day now. This is what they've been, preparing for with their obviously very expensive lawyers, preparing all the documents, all the paperwork, the statements they'll have to give. Anybody giving any kind of evidence to the panel, this is it. This is what it's all been building up to. And for them, it's huge. For Guardiola and the players, well, what changes? Nothing. The bomb was dropped 18 months ago. Since then, there's been no there's been no developments really. They've obviously found out when the hearing is, but the players don't care. I don't think it's on the agenda for any of them whenever there's conversations between decision makers at the club and agents or players or whatever. The charges either aren't mentioned because City just told them on day one, look, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. And that messaging hasn't really changed. Ironically, in terms of Guardiola's future and the outcome, I'd be more inclined to think, well, let's say they were punished and let's say relegated. I think he'd be more inclined to stay as part of his whole defiance of, okay, I'm staying, we're doing this. He said after the charges, we'll call Paul Dickov, Mike Summerby, we'll play in whatever league, we'll bring it on. I genuinely believe that to be true. And I genuinely believe it to be more likely that he would stay as part of the kind of fight to get back in the Premier League, if that's what it came down to be, than he would decide to just leave and say, okay, well, that's it, me done. It may well be the case that if he were to sign a new contract, he might sign it before there's any verdict anyway. But I certainly don't think he'd be leaving because of the charges. He may leave regardless, to be honest. I think that decision provisionally has been taken already that he was going to leave, but obviously the club are going to try to change his mind. He may well change his mind. I don't think the charges are going to have a big bearing on that. But as I say, if there's a big punishment and they are found guilty, I think it'd be more likely that he would stay.
Phil, I'll be honest. I don't know if I agree with Sam saying Pep Guardiola will probably stay if City get relegated. I mean, a man of that stature and his team. I think the staff probably, but it's very hard to see Pep Guardiola managing in the Championship.
Do you know what? I think it's the sort of thing he might do. It's the sort of thing I could see him doing not out of spite, but I guess out of defiance. And I guess to follow on from the fact as well that he's always been, and I suppose he has to be, but he's always been massively supportive of Manchester City in this case. It's not as if he sat there and said, look, I really don't know the ins and outs of this. It's so complicated that, I'm a football manager, I'm a coach. I can't be expected to understand what is a ludicrously complex arbitration case involving so many charges and so many alleged offences. But he hasn't. He sits there week after week and he very much pushes the City line, which is that we've done nothing wrong and we expect to be cleared, and it's all fine and dandy. If this hearing finds against Manchester City, and if Manchester City face a lot of punishment, for a fact that there's going to be a huge amount of grievance around the club and the fan base, but also among players and staff who've won trophies and have been involved in these seasons, particularly if they don't think, legitimately don't think they've done anything wrong. And on that basis, the whole siege mentality thing, I think I almost could see Pep Guardiola saying, I'm going to go to Oxford and I'm going to go to Cardiff and I'm going to go to Sheffield Wednesday and I'm going to start picking this up again. Having said that, I don't think it's as simple as that at all. You only have to look at the difference in, finances between the Championship and the Premier League and the restrictions in the EFL and everything else to realise that you cannot just smash into the Championship with Guardiola and Haaland and De Bruyne and everything else. It won't be like that. But in the end, with Guardiola, it'll probably come down to him doing whatever he wants to do. And I wouldn't be that surprised.
Well, I think we're all obviously massively, we're in a kind of what if, right, speculation mode here. It is quite interesting to me that when Saracens went down, they kept the band together largely.
Mario Toje and those players were still playing, right?
Farrell and those guys, and they absolutely smashed the Championship.
But it's different though for rugby union compared to Haaland in the Championship. Come on,
yeah. I think I'm trying to remember the detail here. I think they lost one game, and of course it's all done on a playoff, and then they absolutely avenged that defeat in the playoff by winning something like 110. Was against Ealing.
Yeah.
And I think the other one that I remember is, and I probably should have refreshed myself on the detail here. Juve, of course, are another
yes, that was the other one.
Interesting precedent, right? So they were done for they were done for match fixing, and they were relegated, and titles were stripped. So that is quite interesting. I think they largely kept their team together. I think a few left and returned, and then went on a mad tear. I think they won, I can't remember now, 7 or 8 in a row. So it knocks them, but in some ways it woke them up. Now, I don't know if that suggests how this is going to go. I definitely think in terms of just looking and observing Manchester City and the people around Manchester City over the last decade or so, if, strongly stress, if this goes against them, many there will just be fired up to prove the world wrong. Now, whether that'll be enough to keep all the players there, whether that'll be enough to keep chief execs and what have you, I think there'll be enough in the sort of culture of Manchester City to come roaring back. I think the bigger issue for me will be around the appetite of the ownership, because this will play badly in UAE. A defeat, a huge defeat for them, will effectively be saying, you guys fibbed. That's quite a tough one to sort of swallow.
Yeah, it is.
Matt, one last thing I wanted to ask. If City win this case and are exonerated at the end of it, are they just going to walk away from it and say, well, fair enough, the charges were brought against us, we fought them, we won, that's the end of it? Or are they going to seek some retribution against the Premier League? Because this has dominated such a long period now, and it'll have taken up a lot of time and a lot of money. And by no means at this stage is it to say that the Premier League are actually going to win this case. What will City's reaction be if they win?
That's a really interesting question. And again, I'm going to say for about the 18th time, I don't know.
I was looking for insight, Matt. What are you doing?
But I think that I'm going to make a couple of guesses.
Okay.
One is they didn't go after UEFA. They won. And you could say, were they magnanimous? I don't know. They won, and the win was enough, and they moved on. Would they want to stump up and down on the Premier League? I don't think so. I might be wrong. I don't think so. I think the fact that the Premier League is trying to apply its rule book is legitimate. There's certainly a court. I know it was looking at a very specific issue around jurisdiction and things that the Premier League was allowed to ask of one of its member clubs. A judge has already kind of looked at this and gone, yeah, the process seems okay to me. They are following a rule book that you've signed up to. I'm not hearing anything that suggests to me Manchester City genuinely think the Premier League is out to get them, is gone massively off-piste, is making stuff up. Yeah, they feel that about the associated party transaction case, but not around this. I think there will be a sense that, look, what happened. Everyone's talked about it for the last 5-6 years. You've done your investigation. You've applied your rule book. We're going to an arbitration hearing. We're going to get our chance. Let's let it play out. If we win, we win. Great. We told you we'd win. We told everyone we'd won. We've won. I think that would be the end of it. I think.
Did that answer your question, Phil?
Absolutely. Perfect. But wait with bated breath.
Let's leave it there, gents. Really appreciate your time. Phil, Matt, thanks so much for joining us. And do not forget to rate and review the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.